Solo Leveling by Gong. Chapter 64 Part 2 The Monarchs' Pincer Attack. Are you awake? Jinwoo heard a familiar voice as soon as he opened his eyes, the white ceiling above him, and the smell of disinfectant stimulating his nose, plus the uncomfortably hard bed. He knew exactly where he was, the hospital. Jinwoo was sure the cold dagger had stabbed him in the heart. But I'm alive? Jinwoo sat up to see two anxious people who looked as if they had been waiting a long time for him to wake up. Jinwoo knew one of them very well. President Wu. The Monarchs. I mean those monsters? What happened to those monsters? How did I survive? Jinchul exchanged a surprised look with the surveillance team member next to him and took off his sunglasses. I have 3 things to tell you. He scooted his chair closer to the bed, his subordinate standing right behind him. Firstly, I am not the president of the Hunters Association. I'm the manager of the surveillance team. Secondly, I was rather hoping you could tell me about the moving stone statues Hunter Sung. And thirdly, Jinchul looked sternly at Jinwoo. How do you know me? Have we met before? Hold on. What do you mean, moving stone statues? Taking survivors' reports into account, the surveillance team brought along members of the White Tiger Guild, but when they arrived at the room, everything. No, that's not what I meant. Flooded with unexplainable feelings, Jinwoo cut Jinchul off and shook his head at this absurd situation. Could it be? Jinwoo looked back up at the ceiling. He thought it looked familiar, but he hadn't expected it to be the same place. Of course, I would recognize this place. Jinwoo had spent 2 straight weeks in this VIP hospital room provided by the Hunters Association after narrowly coming out alive from the double dungeon. Now he was back in that exact room. And based on what Jinchul had just said, the room wasn't the only blast from the past. How? As Jinwoo sat speechless, Jinchul worriedly asked, Are you okay? Jinwoo kept his head down, rubbing his throbbing temples. He waved off Jinchul's concerns. I'd like a moment alone with my thoughts, if you please. Why don't you finish evaluating my magic power? How did this E-rank hunter know that they suspected he might have been reawakened? Jinchul stared at Jinwoo, then shook his head and got back to business. First, we would like to hear what happened in there. If you saw anything before you passed out. I already told you, I don't remember anything. Had Jinchul already talked to Jinwoo? No, he was sure he'd never spoken with Jinwoo before. As a member of the surveillance team, Jinchul never forgot any hunter he had ever met, but he had no memory of Jinwoo Sung. His trauma must be rather severe. Jinchul came to this conclusion and decided to wrap things up quickly. Bring it over. The subordinate approached with a small manometer. Huh? Jinwoo barked a laugh as everything played out as he had remembered. All you have to do is place your hand on this essence stone. Right. With his cooperation, the process was finished quickly, but after looking at the results, Jinchul frowned. He fiddled with the device a few times before finally turning to his subordinate. Why isn't this working? Didn't I tell you to check it before we left? Sir? The panicked subordinate hurriedly checked the manometer, but he couldn't get it operational. It had been working fine until a few minutes ago when Jinwoo placed his hand on it. TSK. Jinchul clicked his tongue and apologized to Jinwoo. It looks like there was a mistake on our end. We'll find a new manometer as soon as possible, so could you please wait for us? This procedure is a necessary part of the investigation. Jinwoo nodded before Jinchul could explain further, so the association employees hurriedly started to leave the room. However, something made Jinchul stop and come back. What's up with him? This was different from his memories. Jin-Woo looked up as the surveillance team director leaned in. By the way, you do know what happens to false rankers, correct? I've met many high-ranking hunters in my time, but I've never met one with eyes like yours. If you're hiding anything, you should tell me in. No, I'm not. Jinchul gazed at Jin-Woo for a beat longer, then gave a polite bow. Apologies if I've offended you. As he watched Jinchul leave the room, Jin-Woo couldn't help but think that the man was definitely better suited to being the manager of the surveillance team than the president of the association. But never mind that. Stat window. Jin-Woo ignored the notice of unread messages and immediately called up his stats. Name, Jin-Woo Sung. Level, 146. Job, Shadow Monarch. Title, Demon Hunter and 2. Others, HP, 93,300. MP, 155,720. Fatigue, 0. Stats, Strength, 324. Stamina, 320. Agility, 340. Intelligence, 340. Perception, 321. Available ability points, 0. Physical damage reduced by 65%. Magic damage reduced by 44%. Skills, Passive Skill, Willpower LV.1, Dagger Master LV, Max Active Skill, Flash LV, Max, Murderous Intent LV.2, Mutilation LV, Max, Dagger Barrage LV, Max, Stealth LV, Max, Ruler's Authority LV, Max. Job Exclusive Skills. Active Skill, Shadow Extraction LV.2, Shadow Storage LV.2, Monarchs Domain LV.2, Shadow Exchange LV.2. Is the increase in levels from killing the Plague Monarch? That wasn't all. Everything Jin-Woo had stashed in his inventory was still there. Seeing the 2 Kamish Wrath daggers in the very first slot of his inventory, it felt like the wind had been knocked out of his sails. He'd returned to the very beginning with all his prizes in his possession. I don't have any Shadow Soldiers left, though. He'd have to collect them again. With his abilities and memories intact, he was confident that he could do everything better than before. But what had happened? Why had he gone back in time? This may have been a second chance for him, but he couldn't bring himself to be happy. He racked his brain for anything that might have slipped his mind. Soon, sure enough, Jaina burst into the room. Jin-Woo! Ever since the orc incident at her school, Jaina had a gloom about her even when she smiled. But the Jaina in front of him didn't have those memories haunting her. The brightness of her expression brought tears to his eyes, and he drew her into a hug. Jin-Woo? Jaina had been ready to nag Jin-Woo about quitting hunting, but she was flustered by his sudden gesture. What? What's wrong with you? Did you hit your head or something? Jin-Woo eventually let go of her and beamed at her. Her anger having abated, Jaina looked at him suspiciously. She couldn't place her finger on it, but there was something different about her brother. Perhaps he'd grown taller in the few days she hadn't seen him. Jaina may have been perplexed, but Jinwoo's mind was now clear. He'd finished drawing up a step-by-step plan of what he needed to do. He kicked his sister out of the room to change. His clothes from the past barely fit and were an absolute mess, but there was nothing he could do about it. He couldn't very well walk around town in a hospital gown. As he left the room and sped past his sister, she yelled after him. Where are you going? To the Hunters Association. What for? I'm going to quit being a hunter. Really? Jin-Woo looked back at Jaina, whose surprised eyes were as large as dinner plates. You should get back to school. I know you only have permission to be off campus to check on me." "What?" Gina was more confused than ever, but her brother was already out of sight. The employee of the association rubbed his eyes several times while verifying the reevaluation results. The last time this had happened was with Hain Cha 2 years ago, wasn't it? He paled as he gazed upon the 10th Korean hunter to get an unmeasurable reading. To think this man dressed in rags would be an S-rank hunter. Hunter Sung, it's not possible to measure your magic power." "I know. Would it be possible to meet with the president of the Hunters Association before redoing the reevaluation?" "The president of the association?" "Yes." Jin Woo was quite familiar with the reevaluation process. Dazed, the employee picked up the phone receiver without a second thought. Yes, sir. That's right, unmeasurable. Understood. Yes, I will tell him that." The president of the Hunters Association had actually agreed to meet Hunter Sung. "Allow me to escort you to the president's office. I know where it is. No need to take me." The flustered employee stared as Jin Woo walked to the elevator after shutting down their conversation quickly. How does someone outside the association know where the president's office is? The employee worried as he watched the numbers go up on the elevator. Against his expectations, the elevator carrying Jin Woo stopped on the correct floor. Oh! Ding! As Jin Woo exited the elevator, a familiar face brushed past him. Jin Woo turned. "Hey, you!" The man pressed the button to keep the elevator doors open. "Are you talking to me? You're not on the watch list of high-rank hunters, which means you haven't reported to the association that you can use stealth." It was Tae-sik Kong, a member of the surveillance team. He froze. "How do you know? Someone will ask you to avenge his daughter. I don't care what you do with the criminals, but if you harm any innocent hunters, I'll kill you." Tae-sik flinched at the antagonism coming from Jin Woo and reached for the knife he kept at his waist, but it was gone. "Are you looking for this?" Jin Woo tossed the knife in the air a few times before returning it to Tae-sik. Realizing this man was completely different from the other hunters he had previously faced, Tae-sik took the knife back quietly. "You only get one warning." Knowing very well Jin Woo could take him down if he so desired, Tae-sik nodded as he holstered his knife. He called after Jin Woo as the other man walked away. "Wait! Who are you? Have we met before?" Jin Woo entered the president's office at the end of the hallway without replying. Once Jin Woo was out of sight, Tae-sik looked at his clammy hand and finally released the open doors button. "I feel like I just saw a ghost." "President Go." Jin Woo came to a halt. There was President Go, alive and well as he went over documents. Jin Woo stood in the doorway, his heart aching at the sight. President Go let out a chuckle. "You opened the door with such confidence, but you don't seem to have the courage to enter. Please come in, Hunter Sung." He moved himself to the couch in the room and gestured. "Why don't you have a seat?" Jin Woo's face fell as he realized that this President Go was meeting him for the first time. He stood with a blank face for a moment before taking a seat. "Thank you." President Go addressed Jin Woo. "Seeing as you came straight here after the reevaluation, it appears as though you're familiar with the process." "That's right." "Then allow me to cut to the chase. Before you begin, I have a proposal for you." "A proposal?" President Go was caught off guard at this young man, who seemed to already be aware that he'd been reawakened as an S-rank hunter. On the other hand, spunk was a great weapon for a youngster's arsenal. He found that he rather liked this man sitting across from him. Maybe that was why he didn't bother hiding his smile and let him continue. "What is it you're asking for, Hunter Sung?" Please change the rules so that a hunter's minions can be counted as strike squad members. Change the rules. That's quite a big ask. I expect you have something to offer in exchange that I won't be able to refuse. Jinwoo paused for a beat. I'll kill the ants on Jeju Island. Jinwoo's priority was to replenish his army, and plenty of quality magic beasts awaited him on Jeju Island. If President Go accepted this deal, he would be able to replenish his soldiers and progress with plans without worry about minimum requirements for raid members. Jinwoo wanted to finish this step before waking up his mother with the elixir of life. But to President Go, it sounded like Jinwoo was out to get himself killed. Stop talking nonsense! Jinwoo had expected that reaction. Instead of faltering, he calmly released the entirety of his magic power for a split second. Infinite power spilled out of Jinwoo. Only powerful individuals could recognize another powerful individual like this, and President Go, the man known as a god among gods, could not believe the sheer power he was witnessing. How? How could this? What is this? He trembled with excitement. President Go had never felt this much magic power from anyone anywhere until now. Jinwoo seemed to be well beyond even the national level hunters. President Go's jaw hung open in surprise. I can take care of the ants on Jeju Island. That was President Go's lifelong wish. He'd been about to lecture Jinwoo about being too reckless, but he changed his mind. Are you serious? Jinwoo nodded. I'm the only one who can do this. Please leave it to me. Jinwoo looked at the remains of the ant-type magic beasts scattered as far as the eye could see, and right beneath his feet lay the corpse of the Ant King. It hadn't been that long since he last saw him, but Jinwoo already missed Baru. He called out, Arise! Jinwoo watched as shadow soldiers emerged from all the dead ants, including Baru. My king! Jinwoo slowly nodded as he gazed at the thousands of ants kneeling to him. His new army was swearing their allegiance to Jinwoo. However, after talking to his soldiers, he became sure of something. Let's stop this. Assembling his army wouldn't fill the hole in his heart. Baru looked up in concern, but Jinwoo could tell that both the worry expression and the distress the ant felt weren't real. Facing him made Jinwoo's heart ache more. He shouted at the top of his lungs. I know this is all fake. Quit it and reveal yourself. The illusion felt very real, so he tried to pretend for a while that it was. But the longer he stayed, the more the emptiness kept growing, and he was now no longer able to hide it. Jinwoo yelled at the artificial energy swirling around him. Hurry up! He abruptly quieted down as he noticed something change. Time had stopped. The lifeless stares of the ant soldiers gave him goosebumps. At that moment, Monarch's domain quickly spread out from Jinwoo's feet. Everything touched by the shadow vanished. Baru, the other shadow soldiers, the corpses, the land, the sea, and lastly the sky. Soon, the whole world was covered in shadow. A deep voice rang out from the darkness. You may stay in this world forever if you wish. It would be like never waking from a happy dream. Jinwoo searched for the source of the voice. Are you inviting me to stay trapped in this fantasy you've created? No, I didn't create this world. This is of your making. Excuse me? What nonsense. His argument died in his throat as he sensed something approaching from behind. Jinwoo whirled around. A figure advanced toward him from the other end of the deep darkness. He wore sophisticated-looking armor that was incomparable to that of the regular shadow soldiers. In his formidable presence, Jinwoo could barely part his lips. This world was created by your desire to make up for all the mistakes you've made, coupled with my power. This is the world of death. In other words, this is my domain. Jinwoo suddenly realized that this darkness He was standing and felt more inviting and cozier than any place he'd ever been. Eternal rest. Death. That meant that the man who had just claimed this, the other side of consciousness, as his domain had to be. Jinwoo wanted to hear the answer for himself. And you are? The man drew closer. I've been watching you for much longer than you think. You've been closer to death than anyone, but you've also fought death more desperately than anyone. He'd been watching Jinwoo? Eventually, the man came to a stop in front of Jinwoo and looked down on him with eyes that seemed to absorb everything in sight. I am the history of your struggle, the evidence of your resistance, and the reward of your pain. I am death, rest, and fear all at once. The man's every word reverberated deep inside the hunter. Jinwoo's heart pounded as it brought to mind all the times he desperately clung to life. The man then grabbed Jinwoo's hand and placed it on his own chest. Jinwoo's eyes widened. He could feel it even through the thick armor. How could he not? It was the familiar heartbeat he could always hear when he concentrated on it. It was the sound of a second heart that beat from parts unknown. It was the black heart, beating strongly in this man's chest. The man murmured, am you?